So the first discussion topic tonight is a discussion, it's kind of the beginning of a discussion for the board, and we have it listed as capacity for a potential mill levy override. And we still have the RBC folks here with us, and Dave and Brett. So I don't know if, Dave, do you want to introduce us a little bit?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll just do a brief introduction. So this idea came about as a result of, I think it stemmed actually from multiple different areas all at once. I don't know that it came from any one particular area, but one that stands out to me is as we were negotiating this year, one of the things we realized is that some districts were passing overrides for salaries, and that for the first time, our district's starting salary will be lower than some of our neighboring districts, of which that's where part of this conversation started, is what might be a fix for that. And the answer is probably multifaceted. One is, and probably the one that's been tried the most, is to get a state fix through the legislature. And you know, I've been doing budget here for 13 years, and we're still holding our breath on that one. The next option really is to look something locally. I mean, our budget is not that complicated. Our revenue sources are not that complicated. It's either state formula or overrides predominantly, and so that's really kind of where this came from. I know that in budget discussions during budget development, salaries came up again and overrides came up again. So it's a reoccurring theme, and I think we're also hearing it as a result of what other districts are doing outside of us. So with that, one of the things that we realized as an administration is that we should probably get together some basic information to help the board think about whether this is something that you would want to continue to explore or not. So tonight is really based on us trying to put some numbers to the topic, so that you can maybe give your thoughts around how we might proceed if we do proceed. So tonight we're going to talk about capacity. We're going to talk a little bit about overall capacity, but we're also going to talk about maybe what we would call a pre-imposed capacity, of which, if you recall, our last election, we ran with the campaign ran with this concept of 52.63 mills being a tax ceiling, if you would. That's a self-imposed ceiling that we actually have capacity to go up to about 20 million legally. That's not to say that the voters would support us all the way up to 20 million. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and we're going to walk through some slides. They're heavy in the visual because I think that it really helps us have a good conversation around the topics. And we'll move forward. Christoph?
Yeah, just what I realized I didn't do, and maybe this is a good time with this introduction, maybe we should allow for the public comment first.
Yes.
And then,
we have somebody signed up?
yeah, we do have some public comment for tonight, so.
Great.
Have a couple.
Yeah,
And Nate
Great.
also has a
okay, and I have a question from Nate first.
Yeah, I may be confused again, but there are a few words up on that slide that if this gets run through in a public meeting, seems like it's a little contradictory. So,
Yeah,
are we
that's
good?
our
Okay.
template.
Yes,
So
okay.
you can just ignore that.
Okay, that's good.
Okay. Right. Okay. So we have, we have a handful of people signed up. This time I'm not trying to count. So, yeah, it's on 2 sheets, and you know, it gets complicated. All right. So first up, we have Miss Shelley Wells. Would you like to join us at the podium? And I won't repeat the comment about the lights. So just pay attention for red.
Okay. My name is Shelley Wells, and I'm a first grade teacher at Dunn Elementary. I've been teaching in the district since 1998, and I'm really tired of the same situation of us not keeping up with inflation. Over the course of my 21 years here, I've lost about 20% of my pay, if you consider inflation. That is not where we should be headed, and Fort Collins has coasted for a long time on people wanting to live here and making it work because they want to live here. We are at a point where people can't make it work anymore. We cannot continue to do it. We can't be continuing to ask us to do more for less. Every year gets harder for us to make our ends meet. And we are now, out of the 11 comparable districts, to us, the lowest starting pay. We are, I believe, 11 out of 11 on starting pay for people with master's degrees. Is this what we want our reputation to be in the state of Colorado? We're already the lowest paid in the nation when you consider us as a state. And when you consider our economy in Fort Collins and the value that our constituents have on education, we should put the value in us. And we need to support a mill levy override because we can't wait anymore. The state is not working fast enough, and there's too big a mess with the state to fix it in time. Good teachers are leaving the field. We are angry. When we sat down and looked at our negotiation surveys, people are upset. And we are at a critical point where we have got to do something. This should not be negotiable at this point. Teachers should be able to afford to live in the communities where they teach. We should be honored for the professionals that we are. We have to continue our education year after year, asking us to improve ourselves. Our salaries should be showing that. I have a master's plus who knows however many hours, and I don't feel like I'm being rewarded for that in any way. I love my job. I am passionate about my job, but teachers can't keep making it work for less.
Thank you. All right. Next up is Mr. Alex Oberto. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Alex Alberto. I've been living in Fort Collins for about 19 years now. I'm actually a product of PSD, going from Johnson Elementary to Weber Junior High, back when they were junior highs, and graduating from Rocky Mountain in 2010. And I was lucky enough to have some amazing teachers throughout my time there, actually some who are here today, which is really fun to see them. And they inspired me enough to become a teacher myself, and now I teach social studies at Fossil Ridge High School. We're here to ask for this mill levy override to target our low and stagnant teacher salaries, especially from the early career educator standpoint. We're facing a really incredibly challenging situation in terms of our student loan debt that we're facing that a lot of older educators aren't quite feeling that we are. It's forcing a lot of us to try to go to income-based payments, which is then making us stay in debt longer and fight more and more interest payments. And that, on top of all the other costs, is just getting to be too much. Along with that is the cost of living in this town. I know of at least 3 teachers who have already left PSD just because they know they could go make more money either leaving the field of teaching or in another district closer to Denver. It gets to the point where most of us have to have multiple roommates just to be able to afford rent in this town, let alone even consider buying a house. Most of us are looking to Wellington or Loveland and these surrounding areas where cost of living is a little bit cheaper just to be able to survive. And that's pulling us away from the communities that we're trying to develop roots in and grow roots in, and it just distance us so much more from our students and from our families that we're working with and from our the local community. So we're here to ask, just please consider this to help retain young educators. We need to bring in more young educators. We are the future of the profession, and we need to keep them in by offering them a salary that's livable in this city. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up is Mr. Niall O'Dwyer. Welcome.
Thank you. Niall O'Dwyer, Fossil Ridge High School. I am also a social studies teacher. So I think it's fair to say that a lot of us here are greatly disappointed at the defeat of Amendment 73 last year. We have the chief architect of the amendment sitting in front of us, and I thank you for your efforts. We are not going to give up on a statewide solution. We're going to go back again and again. But we have to also wage our campaign at a local level, because we have to pay our mortgages now. We have to pay our student debts now. And also remember, when you're looking at us as teachers, we have children. We're also parents. And our children have aspirations. And we're not able to meet their aspirations because we are struggling to be able to afford to live in this town. So people are hurting. They really are hurting. And, there's a couple of ways forward here. There's the DPS model of, conflict, industrial action, and a strike. I don't think anybody in here wants that. Then there's the Thompson Valley way, right? That district is not exactly been one of the most lauded districts in Colorado, but they stuck at it, They were defeated twice, and they got their mill levy passed. In the last 2 years, they're now over 10% increase in their starting salary. We can do this. We can get together, we can campaign together, we can get a more appropriate compensation package for the teachers, for the educators, for the counselors, for everyone. Thank you.
Apparently I missed Mr. Darren Marshall, of all people.
And now I deserve an extra 15 minutes. Thank you so much
You-
for that
you're on.
slight. I was born in a small town.
Red
in West-
light.
Okay, good. Yes, my name is Darren Marshall. I have taught here for 25 years, and I still love it. Probably too much for some of my students. They tell me to back off a little bit. But I wanted to quote a colleague of mine when I first started teaching at Rocky Mountain High School 25 years ago, Glenn Gray. He said, the most difficult job you have and the most difficult job within schools in a limited resource capacity is weighing legitimate need against legitimate need. You're constantly having discussions of where do the beans go? How do we get the beans to have the biggest effect when it's a smaller pile of beans? So I feel for you, and I really appreciate the jobs you do. It's very difficult to have the conversations, but I also want to just quickly hearken to the conversation you had about one type of curriculum in 5th grade tonight to kind of highlight how difficult this profession can be for teachers, right, who are teaching. You know how complicated it can be. You heard how complicated it can be, and that, of course, already warrants what we believe fair compensation, right? And I think you understand that. And I don't want to get any kind of adversarial relationship, but I do want to say that in the 25 years, I too am kind of disappointed with the same old negotiation strategy. We don't have any money. The state doesn't have any money. We're at the bottom of the formula when it comes to funding. Maybe we won't freeze your salaries. Maybe we'll get you a 1 or 2% cost of living increase. I just think that's not enough. In an innovative district, we need to be more competitive than that, and we need to do better. And I want you to enthusiastically support a mill levy override for salaries. I want it to be right out there to say this is for salaries. And it's not for salaries because teachers want a raise. We're not asking for a raise. We're asking for the 5 to 7 years our salaries were frozen. We're asking for cost of living increases that never happened over the last 25 years of my career, except for last year with 3.3%, I believe it was, and 2% of that over 2 years is going to my retirement benefits. So it's not really quite a 3.3 increase. Does that make sense? We're asking not to market this as a raise. It's not a raise. It's recovering salary. And then finally, I just wanted to say other districts, you've already heard them mention, Westminster was not brought up. They just negotiated the highest salary schedule in 500 miles in any direction. $50,000 starting salary, $100,000 max salary. They just did this. Classified, $16.16 an hour. Okay, 4.7% COLA in 2020, $1 more an hour for ESP. It can be done, and it's time that this innovative district put its attention to solving this problem that has really been here my entire career. Okay, thank you for your work.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Ben DeGeer. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Greetings. Thank you guys for your commitment to the students and staff of Poudre School District. We pride ourselves, as Darren just mentioned, on being an innovative district. I've been here 6 years, and I've been invited and supported in pretty much reinventing my view of education in the last 6 years. Most of those years also on a frozen salary. I've watched many inspiring educators and leaders in the district embrace innovative concepts in order to increase authentic experience, develop multiple pathways, even alter start times to benefit kids. These efforts to innovate directly align with the district ends. District End 1.2, success in a changing world. It requires innovation. District End 1.3, going above and beyond. For who? And so if we are going to continue to have this level of inspiring education and remain at the forefront of education in Colorado, then we in return must ask that the board vigorously pursue all means of providing adequate resources to recruit, develop, and retain the most inspiring teachers, administrators, but also certified staff and substitute teachers. When I can't find a sub to come be in my room that is worth their salt as a substitute teacher, that does not allow me to innovate in my lesson plans on the day that I can't be there when I'm going to learn how to innovate in other ways in my classroom. And that bothers me immensely. It's not just teachers in this district. Across the board, our staff needs a raise. Please assure us you will include a mill levy override dedicated to staffing in the next available election and help convince the public that the Poudre School District truly values their stated commitment to innovative education for all. Thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. And next up is Mr. Brendan Gallagher. Welcome.
Thank you. My name's Brendan Gallagher, and I'm the video production teacher at Fossil Ridge High School. I want to just add a closing thought from my perspective to what all of my colleagues have said, and that is that we need a partnership here. We know how much education has changed in the last 10 years. It is a radically different reality than a lot of parents experienced when they went through school. So I want to start by thanking you guys. I want to thank you for your efforts on Amendment 73. I want to thank you for helping support us, those of you who came to the Capitol or openly spoke, for actually removing some of the roadblocks to adequate education funding. And we want to thank you also for the work that you were able to do with negotiations. Our side of the negotiations team said that all of the budget processes were very transparent. So we thank you for that partnership, and we need that partnership moving forward. We know that this is a state issue and it is a local issue. What we can do now is the local piece. So we would love to make progress on that. What you've given us, it does absolutely seem like the best that you can do, and it's not enough. I think we're all in agreement on that. So I would like to thank you for your future partnership, working with us to help approach the state and actually break down the barriers and the roadblocks to adequate education funding. And I would like to thank you for your local work in helping us get this mill levy on the ballot this fall and helping us actively support it. Because we need to show the community the way that they can invest in the people who are actually making the most critical relationships within the school system, and that is the teachers. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up is Melanie Ponchani. I think I said that incorrectly. Please correct me.
Everybody does. That's okay. My name's Melanie Patyandi. Thank you, Dr. Smyser, members of the board. I am a school psychologist at Rocky Mountain High School. I came in this fall and spoke with you guys with my colleagues, and I really appreciate all of your support. I just wanted to talk to you. I'm in a hard-to-fill position, and I came from Thompson Schools first, then St. Vrain Valley Schools, both of which struggled to attract school psychologists and to retain them. A lot of that was salary. It was very difficult seeing these really crucial positions in mental health, which you guys know is a very, very pressing issue right now, having positions go unfilled for years and years, them having to contract out, incredibly difficult. I called upon some of my former colleagues in Thompson Schools this year when we had open positions, because usually people are really excited to come up to Pooter from Loveland, and they said, I just got a decent raise. They just hired a bunch of mental health folks here. I'm staying put. And I have never had those conversations before, and I'm worried about the possibility of Pooter being in a position that Thompson Schools was in, because we're not paying people enough to attract them and have them stay here. So I just want to encourage you to really think about that. You know, all colleagues here need to be paid. All of our staff need to be paid well enough to live in Fort Collins and to support their families. Those hard-to-fill positions especially, if there's a nationwide shortage, we're going to have a very difficult time holding on to folks if we don't pay them what they feel like they deserve and what they need to live in our community. So thanks for your support. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Okay, and that's what I see on the list. Did I miss anybody who wanted to speak on this subject? Mr. Sutherland.
Eric Sutherland, parent of a Rocky Mountain High School junior. Cannot disagree at all. Complete agreement with the statements that have been made by the teachers, but there's a different piece of this picture that has not been recognized by this board or the administration here. You are sacrificing maintenance of effort right now as a deliberate policy to build schools that are going to fill up with dust before they fill up with students. The same factors that are creating cost of living issues for teachers are also disallowing, unenabling families with children that move here, which has been the source of growth for student enrollment in this district going past the last 10 years at least. And so you've got this disparity in your thinking that needs to be corrected here. Now, it's already been alluded that there's this self-imposed ceiling on taxation that has been decided to be divvied up unnecessarily between building new schools, and you even have dedicated the last mill levy override to this growth issue, which is just not happening in the district. So there has to be some fundamental restructuring of what's going on. Now, I pointed this out back in 2015. I was very worried that exactly the scenario that you see here today, that you see in your budget document, that you are going to be reviewing in a future discussion item this evening, was going to occur. And I really think that the members of the faculty of the school district and everybody else needs to heed what's going on with the numbers. Because it does not make any sense to be doing what the district is doing right now, sacrificing maintenance of effort to build schools that are not necessary. Now, I'm not saying that we should not have adequate facilities, not saying we shouldn't have better than adequate facilities, because we do, and that's our tradition here. But there are, this whole landscape of school financing is just a minefield of disparities, counter-purposeful conflicts between state and local shares and everything else. And here's the worst part about it, guys. The worst part about it, which has never been addressed by this board, by this administration, by anybody else. Let's say you have a classroom of 20 students. Now, everybody here will tell me we don't have very many classrooms of 20 students these days. It doesn't work that way. But in that classroom of 20 students, you take one and you say, we're not going to educate you. 5% of that class of 20%. That's 5% of every tax dollar attributable to Poudre School District mill levies right now is being diverted to something that is unlawful and does not even begin to measure up to the social community benefits that educating our kids does, and that needs to be fixed.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, I think we'll push on and get into the slide set. So.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go through our slides now, and again, they're visual and intended to maybe spark conversation toward the end of the presentation too.
Thank you again. Just touching on a couple items, it's important to note that, while the title of this, I think on your agenda item was capacity, certainly there is more capacity than what we're discussing tonight. What we're looking at is just, again, in that self-imposed, what we've said is our ceiling, and this is more just a campaign promise going over several years, over a decade, I believe, and so certainly you can go above that 52.63. What we're looking at tonight is what can be generated while staying underneath that 52.63. But certainly you have the ability, and you can go out and ask the voters for up to as much as 20 million additional or somewhere thereabouts. So certainly when we talk about capacity, we're referencing within those 52.63 mils. I'm going to let Garrett discuss a little bit of the variables that go into this, why we're at this point, which is certainly a positive, the state funding picture aside, obviously, but from a local perspective, we have this ability to raise this revenue underneath this 52.63 mils, and it's something that we should explore but understand why it exists as well. So I'm going to pass it to Garrett, and then we can discuss after that some of the options that are available to you.
Thank you, and as Dan said earlier, thank you for having us this evening. What I would like to do in the first couple of slides is, as Dan alluded to, just kind of briefly summarize why this opportunity exists. And in summary, it's because Poudre School District has seen very attractive assessed value growth within the past two reassessment cycles in 2015 and 2017, and is set to see another one in 2019. In 2015, AV grew 15.2%. In 2017, despite a decrease to the Gallagher rate, you saw an increase of 11.5%. And currently, the state's projecting as much as 14.5% in AV growth this year. And when you look at a lot of the district's existing mill levy override is what we call fixed dollar. So when you look at how you get that dollar, it's a product of the assessed value and the mill levy. And as the assessed value goes up, the mill levy you need to get that dollar goes down. And you see that in the dark blue graphs on this page. If you look at the 2020 collection year, it's the second bar from the left. As that AV, which is the light gray shaded box in the background, goes up, that dark blue box goes down. You need a lower mill levy, which creates that capacity for a potential new override should that be discussed and decided to go forward with. On the next slide, I believe it was in the previous discussion item, we kind of talked about, Dave alluded to that Dan and my job is to monitor the district's existing debt profile. And that includes what we're sitting on now, but it also includes what the district may consider in the future. And what you see with the blue line that drops down in 2025 and again in around about 2032, I believe, is that there's room in the debt profile going forward. And so when you think about the mill levy override versus the bond fund levy, what you kind of think about is $1 goes to one, but it can't go to both. And if we consider the mill levy override, what this kind of shows is if that was to go forward, what your capacity would look like in 2024. And on this slide, we see that assuming 4% reassessment cycle AV growth, we're really looking at as much as $17.5 million in 2025 for either mill levy override or debt service. And that would be as much as $365 million in a bond election. Yeah, just bonds.
Any questions on the initial two charts? Yes, sir.
So you show that capacity in 2024. We're obviously being asked to consider doing a mill levy this year. The actual ballot this year, which would presumably start collecting ASAP. So I'm confused. What capacity do we have, like immediately or next year?
So we've been looking at, as you know, we have very conservative modeling, and in the projections and assessed value, he just mentioned 4% in reassessment years and 0 in non-reassessment years, and that's comparable to what we've assumed in the past. And so these large growths that we've seen in these last 3 cycles have given us this opportunity this year to do what we're going to talk about here as far as the mill levy override goes on the next page. But that is already taken into account in this debt service profile. So even if we are able to do this mill levy override this year, of what we're looking at initially would be 8 million, and we can talk about how that would grow over time. That's already figured into this debt service profile. So with a mill levy override this year, we'll still have step downs in debt service in 2025. That would allow you to either, again, issue debt of that
Okay.
set amount or have any other existing
Okay,
opportunity.
so
for mill levy
so
override.
fine. So I'll wait for the next slide and then we'll
Yep,
talk about
just kind of
other things.
prefacing where we're at.
Thank you.
You bet.
Bye.
Yep.
Nate?
This
Okay.
may be redundant, but I did want to make sure I understand. On the second slide, the 4.2.6 mill levy decrease, you can do up to, if you issue bonds of 345 million in the election in 2024, you'd still have 17.3 million before you reach the limit.
That 17.3 million is the debt service that would be expected on that 345.
Oh, that's the
so
debt
what
service,
that
okay.
gap
Okay.
signifies is the capacity for those $345 million in bonds.
Okay. All right.
Or any combination thereof between an
Right,
override and a
right.
bond.
Okay, got it. So 17.3 is the debt service on up
Right.
to 345.
I-
Got it.
I
Okay.
think as we were having individual discussions earlier to build the foundation on this, we talked about needing probably both a bond and a mill levy. We wouldn't be able to open schools without a mill levy, so it would be some combination thereof.
Sure,
In
and I guess
2024.
In 2024, and maybe it's on future charts. I'm just wondering of what possible combinations are available of both of those at different rates
Well, we would probably have to come back and look at, you know, what those combinations would be, looking at level debt service or whatever type of structure we're looking at, and then combining that with what type of override you would desire. We can certainly run those scenarios. They're not on any charts, you know, on this deck, but certainly happy to do that. I think our primary focus was from this chart was not to get too focused in on what's going on in 24 and 25, but just to show you through the modeling process, we've built in these step downs typically on presidential years cycles. And so even having that ability to have those large step downs and do the mill levy override, we're taking all that into consideration when looking at this.
Okay. You have one more question? All right, go ahead.
So when you're talking about 20 million of capacity and 8 million in the first year, I'm not sure I understand where you're going
Take
with that.
capacity out. So when we're talking about your total your capacity for mill levy override through state law is 25% of total program funding. Okay, that's essentially close to 60 million bucks for the district. You currently have, I think, 43 million. So that difference is where we're coming up with the 20. So that's your true capacity. Now there's also transportation overrides. There's other overrides you could do as well in conjunction with that, and many districts are exploring that because they're already at their 25% capacity. Okay, so that's capacity. When we're talking about what's available to you, this is kind of within that context of that 52.63 that we've always discussed over the last decade. It's not true capacity. Make sense?
It's a self-imposed
Yeah.
limit.
Yeah. Through no legal means whatsoever. It's just something
Kristen.
that we've prescribed.
So, but just out of curiosity, like, what's the history of that 52.63? Why are we using that as our bar?
Because, well, you might have
Yeah,
you know,
I
a
was
better
gonna,
idea.
I was gonna say, because I've got, yeah, and please fill in. One of the things we have tried, and it actually is interesting because there was a mill levy freeze that happened. When I first got here, that mill levy would actually ratchet down quite a bit as AV would grow. There were a number of things that happened over time, but it has stayed fairly stable with maybe some growth from the 2010 election in there. I think we did talk about a tax increase in 2010 as I'm processing in my mind here. And so we did see an uptick there, but it really did hit that 52.63 mils, and then we were able to maintain that through a number of years, and then did run on that campaign. The campaign ran on that in 2016.
It's really just, you know, having the ability to go to your taxpayers and saying we're not going to increase your mill levy.
If I could point out something as well, but it is true that we're not increasing the mills, but the amount per mill is going
Certainly.
up because AV is going up. So that's also a communication issue, is that we can't sound like we're saying we're not increasing your taxes because
home
your
values go
AV's
up.
gone up, right?
As home value goes up, you know, that tax bill will continue to go up. But also from that assessed value, as you see those large increases in assessed value, that's what gives us the ability to do that within these constraints.
Okay, I think, why don't we push on the slides, and then we'll come back and do some clarifying. Okay.
Okay, so looking at a couple of the options, and again, this is just two options, and we're certainly happy to consider more, and you know, as Dave said, this is kind of a starting point for discussion purposes of what we can achieve underneath that 52.63 self-prescribed limit. So looking at what we were basically two options initially, and one would be a fixed revenue override, and this would be comparable to what you guys have used in the past. So you just say, here's the dollar amount, this is what we're going to raise, and whatever that mill levy is required to raise that's what we're going to see year after year after year in perpetuity. You know, there certainly historically, that's what the district has done. I have seen, you know, many districts explore other options using just the mill levy, and I think the primary issue with just having a fixed dollar is, and I heard it mentioned, is to grow with inflation. It doesn't allow for that. So you have that fixed dollar, and then you remain stagnant. So looking at that, that's that top piece of this page, and we'd be looking at 8 million. Again, Garrett mentioned the 14.5% expected AV growth.
Just a point of clarification on the slides we got in the packet that had the choice of no BAB refunding and BAB refunding. I assume this is the BAB refunding.
Correct.
piece
This
of
is just
I just want to be clear
just
for
the
the
BAB
rest.
refunding. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So forget the stuff on the left side of the page. It's just the stuff on the right side. Yeah.
I don't recall which side it's on.
No, you're
Okay.
right. It's
Yeah.
on the left
yeah.
side.
Okay.
Okay. We've got columns. Right.
Got it. Got it. So the 14.5%, and again, no growth in 2021, which I think last year was just over 2% perhaps in a new growth year, and then looking at 4% in each in reassessment years in 21, 22, and 23, 24. And so again, conservative modeling and what that would produce, looking at underneath all of in conjunction with the new override levy and the bond fund levy, and what we would be using as far as bond fund balance. And again, this is a part of that solution, is we're looking at using some bond fund balance, existing bond fund balance, in order to stay underneath that 52.63. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So you can see where we're spending down bond fund balance to the tune of about 10 million once we get to 11.9 million in 23-24. Okay, so let's just take that, put it aside for a second, and look at the second piece of this, which is again the fixed mill. So the 2.12 is what would be required to raise approximately $8 million going into 2020. With these assumptions, and again, they're conservative in nature, 4%, that would grow to about 8.65 million in 23-24. Should AV bump up 10% or 14% or what we've seen in the last several years, that would grow to a larger amount. So it's really dependent upon assessed value growth, and I might point out decrease should that ever happen as well. And so it's important to keep that in mind. If you should see a dip in assessed value, you can only raise whatever that amount will raise, whatever that mill levy would raise. Okay. This, as far as the use of bond fund balance, it's somewhat comparable. We would spend down to about 11.25, but I mean, to be honest, that's somewhat the purpose of this bond fund balance is should we need it, that's how we would want to utilize it, and that's really the purpose of building that over the course of time. And so those are those two options. Again, you're looking at 8 million flat versus 8 and then growing up to 8.6 over time. I think if should assessed value grow comparable to what we've seen, obviously that would grow at a quicker pace. But again, trying to stay conservative. Happy to look at any other combination thereof, but that's certainly where we started.
Okay. So you're ready for questions?
I think I'd like to take questions on this page. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Questions? Nate?
It's something that I realize that 52.63 is a marker to talk about. It goes to what Kristen said and what Dr. Smyser said. I'm concerned, I realize it's a political question, but I'm concerned that we box ourselves into a corner if we talk in these terms without talking about what we think is an amount of money that will get us on the right track. And I participated in the 2016 election, and I get the marketing point that without increasing your tax rate, but like Dr. Smyser said, the amount per mill is increasing, and it doesn't appear to me that even with a fixed mill that you're growing enough to make a difference. And that's why I want to have a conversation at some point soon about how much we think is appropriate to meet a compensation increase that we think is appropriate, given the room that we have under the 25% cap and what we think we anticipate future bond issuance needs.
Okay, and so coming out of tonight, I think we'll need to agree as a board what kind of questions we'll want for advancing the conversation. So I had Rob and then DJ.
Yeah, ditto on what Nate said. I had on my notes here what makes sense. I mean, you talked about having a $345 million capacity for bonds in 2024, even if we did the full 52.63 and reset election. Do $345 million for 2024? Sorry. Yes, I can do that, roughly speaking. You talked about 345 million capacity for bonds in 2024, even if we did a full up 52.63 mil in this coming election. The question, just to not to put us maybe a finer point on it than what Nate said, is do we need $345 million in 2024? So that's, I mean, forget about the political question about whether we could sell it and all this other business. The question is, do we need that in 2024? So that's one thing. And the second thing is it possible to write a mill levy in 2019 that allows us, or that ratchets up in 2024 when our capacity increases? I'm not necessarily saying to the whole amount, I'm just asking a hypothetical question. Is it possible, is that a legal thing to do, even to say, hey, look, we're gonna do 2 point whatever it is now, and then in 2024, we're gonna do, 5, or, pick your favorite number.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it is possible. I'm not an attorney, so I want to make sure that's clear. And probably better to talk with your bond counsel regarding that. But
Okay.
I have certainly seen. I mean, we did an override that was phased in here.
Right.
But it didn't have that waiting until the jump in 2025.
Yeah.
So that would be the question, but I certainly think it would be doable.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think outside the box here
Yeah,
to
sure.
see what all the variables are.
Okay.
Thanks.
DJ?
So you mentioned that you're happy to plug in other numbers. I love playing with numbers myself. So
I bet.
Is there a simple calculation if I was changing it to 2.25 mils to do that, or is that a?
Not necessarily, because of the structure of the debt service.
Okay.
And it's not just a straight line amortization.
It is okay. That's what thank you.
Okay, Dr. Smizer.
Vicki, just for a point of reference, what approximately is the cost currently for a 1% of salary?
Right now, it's $2 million for all employees.
So just to give you a sense of,
So the quick math there would be with an $8 million override, and then assuming it all went to salaries and all went to a cost of living increase, which those are broad assumptions there, that would be a 4% increase.
and then over time, if it was a fixed amount, over time it would decrease in its effect on salaries.
Correct. I mean, basically, what happens is you're able to put that cost of living increase that 1 year, but then you're having to deal with the compounded increase going forward because now you've increased your salary. So that's where it gets challenging, whereas the fixed mill levy approach that would generate more as AV grows could help cushion that to some extent.
But I mean, I certainly understand and agree with your assessments that, you should probably start and look and see what do you need, right? And I think what we're just trying to show you is what's doable underneath this 52.63 mils, but certainly that should not be a limiting factor when addressing what your need is.
Right. And we also have had conversations locally about that need may even stretch beyond salaries potentially, depending on what the needs are. So I think that it's all open for conversation.
Rob or Nate? Nate, did you? Nate?
Well, and I don't know how much historical information is helpful, but I think we heard in public comment, and we know that the employee agreement for next year is a 2.0% cost of living increase, and I think it was referenced 3.3 in the prior year. But it would be helpful to know how much we've lost over the last 10 to 15 years, and it doesn't have to take a lot of time, but it would be helpful to know what that difference is to know how much we need to catch up.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a couple ways to look at it. I think historically, that's one way to look at it. I think looking at our comparable districts is another lens to look at. There's going to be multiple ways to look at this.
Rob? So I have a couple of different questions, or really things that we need to think about, and then we do have the question about what the next steps are going to be in terms of this thing. But, pardon me, whether it's 4% or 6% or 2% or whatever the number is, right? We're talking about an average across the salary pool, and then there's going to be a question about how that average is allocated across the different employees, right? Different employee groups potentially, but certainly across different employees within groups, right? So I guess one question I have is, what is the administration's expectation, not for what the answer is going to be to that question, but for how that question is going to be answered? I mean, in terms of, is that a like a negotiation thing going to happen, or how is that going to work, assuming we find 4 or 6 or 8% or whatever it is?
Well, we have internally, we've been talking about restructuring our salary schedule. We have an enormous amount of squares in our schedule. If you look around in other districts, their schedule is more compact, and their starting salary is higher. And so if we can pull our salary schedule in and bring up the bottom, there's a cost to that. My hope would be that if we passed something that the first year we could use the revenue to readjust that. It costs money to readjust a salary schedule. So if we could keep everybody whole and or they get a raise in order to fix the whole salary schedule, then going forward, our starting schedule could be much higher and people could make bigger jumps between columns and all different things. So to what degree have you been working with employees on looking at salary schedule structure?
We looked at something about a year and a half ago, starting to get an informal group together, and then we realized that there was a lot to do with that, and we should get some professional consultants to help us with that. So we are working with some professional consultants there, looking at our salary schedule. They're also comparing it to other districts and doing some surveying right now. We don't have anything to show you at this point in time, but we hope to have something, some recommendations or some data that we can share toward the end of the summer.
Other conversations that we've other conversations that we've had also is which employee groups may participate in an override, and we've had some initial, and you were asking what is administration thinking. We've had some initial conversations that administration probably would sit this one out, and that the increases would be provided to licensed and classified employees. So again, getting to your allocation question is, the allocation methodology will be much more complicated than what I just laid out in the assumption, meaning 1% equals 2 million. It's going to be a whole package.
Mm-hmm.
So following up on that question, what I'm gathering then is, and this touches on next steps, although not real specifically, we would need to give, we as the board would need, assuming we're going to go forward with a mill levy this November, we would need to give guidance to go forward with that before we see this. I mean, I understand the timeline doesn't require us to certify the language until September, but the reality, in my opinion, the political reality is such that we would need to give, some guidance that we're like on board with this conceptually, like before this, certainly before we leave for the summer, right? So we being the board. So what I'm hearing is we won't see that level of specificity until after we've already given some direction on that, assuming my assumption is correct.
That sounds right to me, yeah, I mean.
Okay, that's
And-
fine.
And,
I'm
and
just
I
trying to
guess I guess that's all under the premise that we are targeting November 2019.
Yes,
and
it is under that, it is under that assumption.
That's another
It is-
variable that could change.
There's no
yeah.
question about that, and I know there's another slide about that. The only challenge I feel with that personally is it makes it difficult to make this decision, assuming all else being equal, it makes it more difficult to make this decision about 52.6, or sorry, quote, what's needed, whether that's within the 52.63 or whether that's above 52.63 or whatever. We can make sort of some assumption about that, but we'll have it. Being a data person, I'm often more comfortable with data. So I'm not complaining. I'm not trying to get you to do something you can't do. I'm just observing for the public and for ourselves that we have a time travel thing
This
here
is
going
gonna
on.
this is gonna be a data question, no doubt. I mean, it's gonna be about making the case of that we're a floor-funded district, that we're the lowest in the country. We're a floor-funded district in Colorado. I mean, you build that case, you pretty quickly paint the picture as to why we're maybe even exploring this.
Now, I'm going to throw in a comment or question as far as things that we may need to get done, and I saw that timeline flip up there briefly. We may need to also consider adding polling. There was some discussion about getting professional support on that front to make sure we understand. I think the thing as a board that's going to have to decide on this is trying to make this successful. So we're going to have a lot of variables, and there's capacity that we want to consider what's going to attract the people to work on the campaign and what's going to be successful to the best of our knowledge. So I wonder if polling is one of the things we want to throw into this, and how do we get that done and when?
Yeah, and I know, and Dan's going to talk about that. I know we've talked some about people that we could contact to get some quotes on that. Roughly, what is about 30, maybe
Well, it
less than
depends.
that?
It depends on the extent of the poll. You know, I think we've seen, or at least in my experience recently with other districts, we've seen the cost go up a bit because it's harder to get a scientific sample of voters with cell phones and everything else. So I think you'd probably be looking at 25 grand, somewhere in that range.
And just following up with, I assume that'd be out of the board budget.
Yeah, I mean, we had discussion at the last meeting around the board's budget, possibly being increased with some one-time dollars to support that if necessary. We do have a few unallocated one-time dollars left in the next budget cycle.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think from a timing perspective, you would probably want to get that done certainly before summer and you know, as quickly as possible.
So that'd be this week. Okay, Nate.
Yeah, sure.
That was code for
So I was wondering
ASAP.
too.
Not like summer school, but
Yes. It's July 8th, isn't it? So we've got some time.
yeah.
So this is kind of an elementary question, but it goes to the assumptions, and even if we don't have the data, the question of whether that salary schedule that we have is not as effective or good as these other districts. I would like to know the pros and cons of changing the salary schedule in terms of who benefits and who bears a consequence that they're not going to like, which causes them to have concern. And Dr. Schmeiser talked about, I mean, it costs some money to change it to keep everyone whole, but it seems to me there are consequences that go beyond just keeping people whole for a couple of years and a 25-year employee or something.
You can characterize the one that you're developing or thinking about. What I, generally speaking, what you try to do is pull the bottom end up so that people make more money sooner. And then in terms of moving across for education and hours, you get more money sooner, you stay there a little longer before you can jump to the next one, and then you stay there a little longer. So that's what I meant by compressing both in longevity and in education moves. So the idea being you don't move as often, but you get more money earlier.
Okay.
Is that a fair characterization of what you've been looking at?
Yeah, we've been looking at something like that, and also with our current salary schedules, each cell is not equal as far as the increases. A lot of the ones that we've been looking at, as far as some of the other districts, they are equal. So they go up by either $1,500 for every step or $500 for every lane. So it's very consistent, and people understand and know exactly what they're going to get each time they move.
Okay, and what I suggest for the board is we start trying to let this move along so we don't stay here too late. So, but let's get some more questions before we.
Yeah, I think, Dave, you alluded to this. There has been some discussion both from I think there's been some discussion that's been motivated both by a community recognition that mental health and safety are important elements in our school system that are potentially underfunded, and also from the point of view of teachers telling us that we need, and counselors both actually, that we need more support for mental health, in particular social emotional learning and the like. And it may be, given that this is a political discussion, or it will turn into a political discussion, it may be that recognizing that need and including some small part in terms of additional staffing for mental health, as an example, into this mill levy might help the community to feel, different elements of the community to feel better about it. Also might help teachers and counselors in terms of workload. So I think we need to see whether we want to put that on the table or not, right? I want to be clear that I've heard the message loud and clear, and I am personally supportive of the bulk of this going to salary increases. And there are this other sort of personnel need. I'm not talking about building or furniture or anything else, that at least I think needs to be aired. We can decide what the right thing is to do about it. That's all.
Are there other questions before we get to the slides? You guys good? All right, why don't we move through some more of the slides and see where it leads us.
Sure.
So, in discussion, when you're talking about pursuing, whether it be a mill levy override or a bond or anything else, you certainly want to look at the election year dynamics. And we don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this. I know certainly it's something that we have discussed in the past, but an off-year election like a 2019 election versus a 2020 presidential year, certainly the demographics are different. The turnout is much higher, obviously, in a in a presidential year versus an off-year election. In an off-year election, you need, especially given the timing is such that, as we discussed, it is May, and if we would be looking into 19, you would want very motivated volunteers that could do a lot of precinct walking, a lot of face-to-face communicating, and that's really your best bet, certainly in an off-year election. Whereas a 2020 election, you can count on folks that are going to be turning out. Certainly, you don't have to lean as heavy on those volunteers, but I would certainly stress that if 2019 is what you would be looking at, that should be your primary goal, is finding a large group of very motivated volunteers that could assist you in the campaign.
We can help with that.
I'd assumed that was the case, yeah. So if there's not questions on that, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on that, I think looking at key election deadlines that are coming up, I know Rob already addressed when we would be looking at certifying a question, but there are other elements to this that would need to be considered. July 26th is when you would notify the county of your intent to participate. Now that doesn't lock you in necessarily, but certainly something to consider when we're looking at deadlines. An IGA would need to be signed by end of August. Ballot question would be September 6th. And we don't have to go down this line, but certainly you can see this compressed timeline when you're looking at what would need to get done between July and November. So that should be an important consideration as well.
Okay, and then were you going to read the disclaimer that's in the next page of our slides?
Well, who read the resolution? You did
Yeah.
a good job.
All
Do you
right.
want to read the disclaimer as well? Okay.
Okay.
No, I'm not.
Any questions at this point? And we should also start thinking about what guidance do we want to provide at this point. So DJ.
This is just clarification. When I was reading this, and maybe I'm just, but on the slide above this, what was the 60%?
60% is essentially the voters that you're always going to have, and then the 20% is always hard no's, and 20% are always hard yeses. So the 60 is what you want to, that core you want to concentrate on. That's the persuadable on the fence voters.
I went back and read that slide. I don't know how many times trying to figure out where that fit in, and I was
probably put a graphic explaining that.
Label your axes.
And you're saying that voters don't turn out to vote for school board because we're just kidding.
Typically, that doesn't draw as many voters as a presidential year now.
Rob, you have a question, and then Nate. Okay, Nate, and then Rob.
Mine's a small question about the August 27th date. Is that just an agreement about who pays the cost of the election?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Any other questions, Kristen?
I'm just sort of, a couple of things, just wondering how fast we can get out polling data, whether or not it's, based on what we have, steps, lanes, that sort of compressed, just what people, maybe asking what people would be willing to, pay their teachers. And so see if we can go above that, that mill levy, ask the question if they'd be willing to do that. So when can we get that polling data done? And then my other question was about the steps lanes with that compression. I just want to make sure, and I think you were alluding to this, but I didn't really hear a clear answer on it. What happens if we're raising the entry level? That's great, and then the increase in this or the compression of the steps and lanes. But what happens to those teachers who have been here 15, 20, 25 years? Is that going to be are they still going to get the increase that they deserve as well?
Looked at, the other districts, they have, it's been a process. It's not immediate. So there's been some temporary cells that have been left there for such situations. And then as those people move on, they're adjusted accordingly. So they're kind of held harmless, so they're not, yeah, something like that.
Okay, so just for my clarification, so if somebody's sort of in a step lane, been there 15 years and has a master's degree, they'll probably be held there for a little while, but the next time they get into move up in a step or a lane, it'll be the increase to the next.
They might still get an increase the way it is, these temporary cells that are built. So what we need to do is look at who's in those cells right now and come up with a plan to make sure that they're not stuck.
Behind. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you. Sure.
To clarify the scope of the dollar amount that we're talking about, if we're looking at a simplification, like truncation of the salary schedule, in general terms, to do a 1% COLA, like Vicki said, it's $2 million. Last year, we did modeling looking at a simplification of the current salary structure, exactly what you said, raising the starting salary to, say, $40,000, and then simplifying the left to right lanes that represent experience. And then, as I think Dr. Smyser said, you're rewarding them more earlier in their career, but it's a little bit harder, it takes a little more time to change. And with the temporary cells that Vicki was talking about, we're talking approximately $6 million for the licensed salary schedule only to get the starting pay, and this is in last year's salary schedule, to get the starting pay to $40,000. So it's pretty significant money pretty fast, and that is still holding a significant number of people harmless on in temporary sales, basically.
So that's why I said the first year of revenue might need to go just to do that. Now, keep in mind that some employee got all 6 million of that dollar, not one, lucky one. But, there are few people who may have been held harmless, and obviously we'd look at that carefully and make sure everybody knew what was going to happen to them personally. But all that money goes into the salary schedule, and then
And how you
moves
choose to
after
structure the salary schedule would show how many people were in a temporary cell versus how many people received a direct immediate benefit, instead of having to wait a year or two or whatever the case might be until they were positively impacted by a change.
I have a question from DJ.
First off, I want to say that maybe we should come up with a different way to term that so people aren't in cells. But on your point about the polling, I do think it's very important that we do that, but we cannot rush quick enough that we got to make sure it's written correctly. Those poll questions, if they are written poorly, they do such a bad job of giving us information. So we do got to make sure that we get that really narrowed down and what we want it to be helpful for us and to be productive. So I totally agree with it. I just don't rush too fast.
No, agreed, and I just want to make sure that we ask the question, would people be willing to go above that 52?
All right, Rob, I'm gonna see if we can get you to launch us into a bit of a discussion of what we need to do.
So I have a proposal for, not a motion, but a proposal here about what I'd like to understand at our 6/11 meeting so that we can make a definitive, for some definition of definitive endorsement of what we want to do one way or the other. I'll just say, just to be clear for everybody, I think we ought to go for a 2019 mill levy. And so what I would like to see is information from the administration on what we actually anticipate will be needed in terms of capacity for other things like bonds in the foreseeable future, 2024 in particular. In other words, do we really need that 345 million? And if so, what for? Right. Okay? Secondly, I don't think 4% is enough. So I'm uncomfortable with $8 million being the cap on this deal, because I just don't see that I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's adequate to motivate the teachers. And so I would like to see at least, and this is why I think the question you asked is important. Us lay people can't just fill in a value here and see what happens to everything, right? So I would like to see at least some analysis of a 6 to 8% salary increase and the most effective financial way that happens. I don't know what that does to 52.63. I don't know what that does to anything else, but you guys who are smart on that thing, I'd like to at least see what it would take to get that kind of a raise or that kind of an increase to the salary pool.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of growth.
Yeah, it is a raise, but as we discussed, it's a little more complicated than everybody's going to get a 6% raise. So I just want to be careful about that.
Excuse me, sorry.
Whoa, the language that I use for that. So, and I would like to see that with a fixed mill, not a fixed dollar amount, so that we have incremental dollars to work with. I want people to be careful to realize that a 4% increase in AV, therefore a 4% increase in this mill levy, does not mean a 4% increase to the salary pool, right? Because it's a 4% increase of the increase, not a 4% increase of the base. But in any case, I'd like to see the information with a fixed mill. And to the extent that it's legally possible and that we don't have a need for the full $345 million in 2024, I would like to understand what the parameters are in being able to add that ratchet thing at an appropriate interval with appropriate safeguards and whatever. And if legally that's not possible or whatever, then I want to hear that too, obviously. And then to the extent that we would want to see some mental health support put into this measure as well, I would be very interested in hearing from the administration what you think that might look like and what that might cost what that might cost. So those are the things that I'd like to understand in order to sort of give a thumbs up on this thing.
So at that first bogey, does anybody else want to add, or Nate?
Rob, that was well thought out. Thank you. I agree with that, and I support all of what you said. And my consideration about timing on this is I do have a little bit of concern that it may be too soon after 2016, but I'm more concerned that some of DJ's friends are going to pop another statewide ballot issue on us, and I don't want to compete against that in 2020, and it seems like 2021 is too late. So I think it's got to be 2019. And I also want to do something, if we're going to do this, I want to do something that's significant enough that it makes a real difference. And as I think Rob alluded to, we're going to need help with this very quickly. And it's going to be important that people are going to be motivated to work on a campaign and help get it passed. And on the polling, I totally agree with DJ that there are people out there that know how to structure these questions, and it's better to get it right than fast so that we have something and we don't waste our money on a bad poll.
Okay, Naomi.
I would also be in favor of putting this on the 2019 ballot. Hopefully we can campaign together, and Mr. Marshall and Mr. Gallagher, in addition to their colleagues, talked about partnerships that would work, because this is certainly not something that the people sitting at these tables can do alone. With my littles in the schools, I would be personally devastated if their teachers chose to leave this district. I'm going to go ahead and name drop Tricia Latuda and Marge Ballard are both excellent, and it would be truly devastating to me if my youngest child did not have the opportunity to experience that level of education. I totally understand what it's like to deal with student loan debt. I feel you. And I also recognize that I think it was at the National Technical Honor Society, there was a teacher from Rocky who was so excited that for the first time they had a computer science person teaching computer science because they could get so much more in the private sector. And it was just really astounding that this person was able to make this shift. And I truly worry with the way that our world is changing and the education that our children need, we are not going to be able to provide that for them because we cannot afford the experts in the field. So, it sounds like we are willing to jump in with this partnership given the great information and the great work that the rest of us are going to be doing.
DJ.
I really like everything that Rob said. I would like to specify, I guess, a little bit more, though, on the mental health, social emotional aspect. Is I personally would like to see what we think the cost would be to put a counselor in every elementary school, and that we fund that. I'm narrowing the focus a little bit on that, but I just want to make sure that is seen and talked about, and we look at that. And I know these guys that are showing up here right now are going to be great partners for us to do this. But I do ask you, get out and get more of your friends together on it, because it is a heavy lift as we have learned. So thank you.
Carolyn.
And I would like to say that I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made here tonight. I support this mill levy override, and I support raises for teachers. I agree that we have seen your wages erode over the past few years, and I think it's sad when a manager at a restaurant is making more money than you guys are, and I think that we should pay you like we value you, and we do value you. And then I would like to remind everybody that after we do this, we still have a lot of statewide work to do to put a permanent fix in place here for the whole state.
Kristen.
Yeah, and I would just like to say basically ditto for everything that's been said here. Y'all deserve to be paid like the professionals that you are. And the fact that you go ahead and take care of our kids every day, socially, emotionally, academically, physically, it's something that we need to make sure that you're also financially paid for that and rewarded for that. And so I want to make sure that our taxpayers are willing to do that as well. And you're right. There's a saying that slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And so I want to make sure we do this right for y'all. So That's the incentive I have, and so I think if we go ahead and do this right and have that partnership going forward, I think that this can be very, very successful. So, and I want to say thank you all for coming out tonight too. I know you've been sitting through a really long meeting on a morning that you're gonna have to go to work in the morning at 6:30 or whatever it might be. So, thank you for sitting here through this, and now I'll shut up.
Okay, and I think maybe we should call it at that. I think the comments that have been made are really profound, and I really do like yours. What's most important is that we make whatever we choose to do successful. So let's take the steps in the next 2 weeks to get facts. I think Rob and Nate called out the important things we need to do. So if we have any questions, we'll talk about it in the agenda to make sure to get that going. What was that?
We're comfortable they have a clear direction.
Well, and if not, we'll talk about it one more time. So I think I wrote down everything very carefully, and yeah, so we'll get that going.
Dave wrote it down, Sandra wrote it down, Christoph wrote it down.
Yeah, I think we all wrote things down. So thank you very much to the two of you from RBC for showing up as usual. We really appreciate your joining us. So, okay.